Okay, we'll go ahead and get started with our program. Thank you everyone for coming this morning. Today we have our lunch and learn on the importance of representation in democracy for health and well-being. I'm Sarah Whitney, and I am one of the community outreach coordinators at the Healthier Black Elders Center. I want to give a brief introduction of the Healthier Black Elders Center before we get started with our program. HBEC started in 1997 and is funded by the National Institutes of Health. The center aims to address and reduce health disparities through research and education. We do this through our research registry, where individuals learn about various social and behavioral research studies and may be invited to participate. Currently, we have about 1,200 active older adults in the registry, and we also host various events like today that provide health-related education to the community with a focus on aging. We provide education on a wide variety of topics ranging from heart health to nutrition to oncology recovery. Typically, we hold these events in person, but we hope you're still able to enjoy the virtual format in the meantime. To learn more about our program, please visit our website, www.mcuaar.org. You can also call our office, and our number is 313-664-2616. For anyone that's not currently an HBEC member and would like to join, please call our office to complete a survey and get added to our mailing list. Then you will start to receive our biannual newsletter, and that lists program events, recruiting studies, and more health information. I will say the website one more time and the phone number for everyone. The website is www.mcuaar.org, and the phone number is 313-664-2616. I want to make a few housekeeping announcements before we get started. This webinar is being recorded and will be available to watch at a later time on our website. For those that are joining by computer, if you have questions for any of our speakers, please submit them in the Zoom chat or in the Zoom Q&A box at any time. The Q&A button can be found at the bottom of your Zoom window. For those who are joining us by telephone, if you have any questions that don't get answered by the end of the program, please call the Healthier Black Elders Center office and leave a message with your question. One of our staff will follow up with you. Next, we have a couple of quick announcements from Sean Norick, another one of the community outreach specialists.
Good morning, everybody. Just a couple of brief announcements here. First and foremost, up in the Flint area, our friends at the Valley Area Agency on Aging are hosting their annual Senior Power Day event. This will be on Wednesday, May 25th, 2002 from 9 to 2. And this will be at Crossroads Village. Tickets will be $4, and the ticket includes a lunch, admission, lunch, and a steam train ride. So, and we have a giant resource tent. This is an outdoor event, and I have worked it before. We HBEC will have a presence there. I will be there, and we will look to tell everybody a little bit more about our project, and hopefully start to get individuals signed up for our new registry. So if you're interested, this is a wonderful, great event outdoors. So hopefully the weather holds out. Come out, get some fresh air, and come be social with us, and come meet us in person if you would like. Also, we have a website, Recruiting and Retaining Older African Americans into Research, ROAR. So if you'd like to visit this and learn a little bit more about some of the works going on in Flint right now, please visit us at https://www.engageus.org, and I'll put that in the box. All right, and before we set aside today's lunch and learn, we do have upcoming lunch and learns in the next couple of months. So Tuesday, May 17th, we'll be presenting, Emily Bodie will be presenting The Road to Cancer Recovery, Facts About Rehab and Prehab for Oncology Patients. And then on Wednesday, June 15th, at our same time from 11 to 12:30, we will have Meg Watt from the Alzheimer's Association come in and talk a little bit about what we can do to continue to support our brain health. So that will be it for announcements here. Sarah, back to you. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Sean. Next, I would like to introduce a special host for today's event. We have Dr. Tam Perry from Wayne State, an associate professor in the School of Social Work, and one of the faculty leaders at the Healthier Black Elders Center.
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks, Sean. I want to also say I will be in Flint at the Senior Power Days. So also I want to just say welcome and thank you so much for coming to our program today. The topic is of utmost importance, but also just reaching out to both audiences. We have a Detroit audience calling in and a Flint audience calling in, as well as hopefully people from around the country. We have circulated the information about this talk far and wide because of its importance. I just also wanted to explain how we got to this topic. So as we plan lunch and learns, the Community Advisory Board of the Detroit wing of the Healthier Black Elders Center has a committee called Critical Crossroads, and it is to address or highlight social determinants of health. These are the things that happen that affect our health. And we have usually had one of the members of this committee speak for about 10 minutes as a part of a lunch and learn on topics like the housing eviction moratorium, how to apply for FEMA funding for flooding, other key issues that affect bills in Congress, current events, etc. Today, we decided to devote our entire program to a social determinant of health. And to me, that's a hallmark of this committee, which was only formed last year, the work we're trying to push. We're also trying to help everyone who listens in make these connections. So we really appreciate the lineup we have today. We have our first, I can honestly say I was so delighted that we have someone calling in from San Diego, California. So our next speaker will be Lourdes Guerrero, who is the co-director of the National Coordinating Center for the Resource Centers for Minority Aging Research. So this is a very big deal because our program in Michigan is one of 18 centers funded by the NIH. And so we are so lucky to have the leadership at that level. We've also been very lucky in Michigan to be funded since 1997. It's a very long-standing program, and we couldn't do this program without the continual funding of the federal government. So we are thankful for sure. Along the way, the next speaker will be, we really thought we need everyone to hear from older adults themselves. It's a priority of our program. And so we thought we would have one of our Community Advisory Board members, Henry Swift, speak to kind of open the program after Lourdes to kind of hear from his voice why this topic matters. And then Mr. Jim Bridgeforth will close our program before the Q&A. So I'm excited. It's going to be a great program. The behind the scenes work to pull this off has been immense. And of course, I do not want to forget our key speakers who are from the Wayne State Law School and School of Social Work. So that will be Peter Hammer and Heather Walter-McCabe. But I will just say, I'm going to turn it over to Lourdes for a few words. And thank you so much for waking up early, Lourdes.
No worries. Thank you for having me. I'm bummed I'm not there to be with y'all. I've never been to Michigan. Anyways, so thank you so much for inviting me to give opening remarks today. It truly is my pleasure to reiterate that your voice matters and remind all of us how important participating in our democracy is for health and well-being. Although we tend to view voting as a very personal and individual act, in many communities, one person's vote actually represents the vote for many in their households or for extended family members or community members who can't vote. So voting is not only an individual civil act, I like this candidate, I think I'll vote for her, but also a collective act to support candidates or policies that promote the health and well-being of those members of our communities who do not have a voice in this process. So yes, one person, one vote. Our legal scholars can talk all about that, but each vote represents so much more. As an educator and a social worker, I know how important civic engagement is for influencing public policies. We have measures on ballots across the country to determine what is taught in schools and to determine how much and which kind of social services people can receive. As a researcher and as an academic, I depend on federal and state funding to support the work we do to train the next generation of health professionals and of scientists. And our elected officials make those funding decisions to support our work or not. So I really appreciate the need to participate in our democracy and to ensure the health and well-being of the communities that we care about. Here in Southern California, sunny Southern California, you'll readily hear folks say, su voto es su voz. Your vote is your voice. And more often than not, your vote is also for those who can't. So whose voices are silenced and whose voices get heard? I am sure your wonderful lineup of speakers will provide all kinds of insights on these questions, and I look forward to hearing what they have to say this morning. And on behalf of the Resource Centers for Minority Aging Research and the Coordinating Center, thank you so much for putting this session together, for being here, for listening, for being engaged, and for being such a wonderful resource in your community in Michigan.
Thank you so much, Lourdes. I'm clapping for you. Also, I forgot to mention, because I got nervous, Lourdes is a very accomplished researcher at the University of California, San Diego, and she's in the neuroscience department, and she studies neurocognitive aging for Latinx populations, particularly. I'm going to now turn it over to Mr. Henry Swift, who's a couple of things, Henry, as you introduce yourself. Could you say how long you've been a community advisory board member and maybe why you got involved in the leadership role at HBC? And then I know you have something prepared. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Tam. I have been a CAB member I'm in my third year now. And one of the reasons I joined is I am 85 or will be 85 this year. So I'm an octogenarian. So I want to find out what in the world am I getting into at this age. So that's basically the reason, to find out what is going on in the aging process. However, today I wanted to address this important development or fact. Today, our most fundamental constitutional rights are under assault. Democracy is slowly being chiseled away by those pushing for a non-democratic opposing form of government. For example, white supremacists disavow citizenship to and for other Americans, African Americans, Latin Americans, Asian Americans. They tout the superiority of whiteness over others of different color or culture. Indeed, our freedoms are under serious threat. However, the most invasive threat on our rights is the suppression of voting rights. It strikes at the very core of democracy, and it's being perpetrated by those who we, the American electorate, have empowered with preserving, protecting, and promoting the right. But instead of urging all Americans to exercise it, 49 state legislatures across the country are enacting laws to see that many Americans, minorities, college students, older adults, rural Americans, recently even those with disabilities, are denied and deprived of this inalienable right. I would like to open this discussion on voting rights endangerment with a brief excerpt from the biography of Frederick Douglass entitled Prophet of Freedom. Quote, in Massachusetts in the late 1830s, men, including blacks, registered to vote by paying this small annual tax, $1.50. In the sweep of Americans' racist and discriminatory history with voting rights, it is remarkable that the most famous black man of the 19th century, Frederick Douglass, shortly after escaping from slavery, while living with a new assumed name, with no other identification and certainly no proof of birth in the United States, and while still, quote, illegal, end of quote, as a fugitive from Southern justice and the property rights of his owner, could instantly become a voter by paying $1.50 and having his name placed on the tax rolls. However, I'm sorry, bear with me. I'm getting my notes together. So, so here we have item A, a fugitive slave owned as property. B, no residence. C, no birth certificate. D, paying $1.50 poll tax. Yet he could register to vote and did in fact vote. Now, fast forward 192 years later, 2022, and contrast that to our current lawmakers' movement to suppress the voting rights of many Americans in blatant violation of the 15th Amendment of the United States Constitution. Now consider, 1, the near overthrow of a fair election on January the 6th. 2, extreme polarization and paralysis of the federal government. And 3, death threats against politicians, election board officials, school board representatives who go against prevailing partisan views. Now, these are the conditions and atmosphere we presently live under. We are a fledgling democracy that must strive to hold fast to a sense of rightness, responsibility, and respect. Parenthetically, the health of our nation has suffered a catastrophic pandemic, COVID-19, decimating hundreds of thousands of lives. It affected all ages. Older adults, in particular, suffered disproportionately. This was especially severe in local communities and cities like Detroit. Its devastation was extensive, impacting broad institutions, economic, social, educational, and certainly religious. The question is monumental. Will we rise to meet these challenges? Can we achieve the societal and political ideals envisioned by our founding fathers? This remains in the hands of each and every one of us. Now, to assist us in analyzing and evaluating political petitions, positions, promises, and to enable us to make more informed decisions about who will represent us in this democracy, we've invited Peter J. Hammer, Wayne State University Law School professor, and also who is the director of the Damon J. Keith Center for Civil Rights. And we've invited Heather Walton-McCabe, who is Wayne State University Law School professor and the School of Social Work. So please welcome Peter J. Hammer and Heather Walter-McCabe.
Great. Thanks so much, Henry, for those very insightful comments. And I think you're going to see in our discussion that's going to echo things you've already talked about. So we'll be talking about very similar frames. And I love the quote from Frederick Douglass, or the story of Frederick Douglass. So you also see it in my remarks, the importance of history. And I think that's a wonderful prelude to that. So Heather and I have talked about, I'm going to start, I have a PowerPoint to sort of walk through and focus predominantly on threats to democracy that Henry was outlining, and thinking about how communities can respond. And then I'll turn it over to Heather, who will talk more about the role of voting and representation and voice in communities and health. So bear with me as I try to bring my PowerPoint up and start from the beginning. Wonderful. So I always like to begin my presentations by giving homage to the namesake of our center, Judge Damon J. Keith. And I think you're going to hear a lot of similar concerns of Judge Keith, who got more exercised about voting rights than any other civil rights issue. And I'm going to have a couple of quotes later on from Judge Keith and an important dissent he wrote in 2016 against efforts to suppress votes in Ohio. But I really want to thank the healthy Black elders and the role that you have played in your own lives, the role that your parents and grandparents and great-grandparents have played, really as guardians of our democracy. And the sad news I have for you is that the job's not over, right? That the role of the Black community, role of people of color in defending democracy and making the hopes of democracy real for everybody has been the mainstay of our history and is going to be our first best hope for our future going forward. And I want to ground it a little bit in again, the sort of elders that we have, the ancestors we have, and the words of Dr. Martin Luther King, who said that the vote is the most powerful instrument ever devised by human beings for breaking down injustice and destroying the terrible walls which imprison people because they are different from others, right? So it's not just an election, right? It is people's livelihood, it's people's lives that are at stake. It's our entire democracy that's at stake when we're talking about the right to vote. We have to realize, as Henry has already alluded to, our democracy is under threat, right? So the sort of big two questions I want to be focusing on is what are the threats of our democracy and how can communities respond? And if we think about the threats of democracy, imagine democracy as a board game, right? One form of the threat to democracy is the cheating at the rules of the board game. I'm still going to try to play the game, but I'm going to cheat at the rules to get an unfair advantage. Right? The second threat, which is even more serious and dangerous, is the threat that they're simply going to destroy the board game. Right? If they're perceived that they're not winning the game, they're willing to destroy the democracy that's underpinning us. And those are two different types of threats, although they obviously overlap and are interrelated. You know, the cheating on the rules is pretty standard, right? Things that you've heard about, things you've read about, things that are being passed by states, stricter voter ID laws, restrictive mail-in voting, voter intimidation, prohibitions on early voting, not voting on Sundays, harsh requirements for voter registration, failure to timely process vote registration so people can actually be allowed to vote, polling place reductions and consolidations, inadequate, poorly trained staff, so long lines are there, often consciously constructed, relocating polling places, right? So the place you went last year is not the place you're going next year, running out of ballots, right? All of those things are the kind of cheating at the rules of the board game, and they're real, right? And we have to fight against them, but we fought this fight before, going back to poll taxes, going back to literacy tests, going back to a whole long lineage of efforts to restrict the ability of African Americans and other people of color to vote in this country. The other sort of threat, right, the destruction of the board game, right, is also things that are top of mind and mentioned by Henry. You know, the whole big lie, right? The false allegations that voter fraud changed the outcome of the last election, that our sitting president is not legitimately elected, that Donald Trump is still a rightful president, right? The efforts that are being unveiled by the congressional hearings where top Trump officials were plotting, in essence, a coup. They were trying to get states not to certify election results. They were trying to get states such as Michigan to enroll fake electors, right? They were trying to say that the vice president could simply not process the electoral votes and prevent the certification of a new president, right? All of that culminating in the January 6th insurrection, but it didn't stop in January 6th of last year, right? These threats to our democracy, this decision that if I can't win, I'm going to simply destroy and burn down the house, are real, right? And I think those are some of the more serious threats to our democracy that have happened in my lifetime, right? And they harken back to older threats of democracy that we'll talk about towards the end of the discussion, right? But we have to start thinking deeper about what are the causes of the attacks on democracy. And Henry rightfully already called out the notion of white supremacy and the rising white nationalism, right? Things that we thought that we had gone beyond as a nation are coming back, right? And coming back in very serious and threatening forms, right? Complementary to the sort of notion of white identity being a cause of the attacks, the role that white Christian nationalism is playing, and the role that religion of various forms and stripes, including views about gender, views about family, that they also perceive are being under attack. But again, you have to be thinking empathetically if you're going to be able to respond, right? So it's going to be a challenge to everybody to start thinking, why is this happening, right? Not to rationalize it, but to understand it, because if we don't understand it, we can't act strategically, right? And if we start to sort of peeling back parts of the onion, a large part of that is a growing sense of white anxiety. Part of that's driven by the changing demography of the country. Part of that is just changing economics that everybody is suffering from, sort of increases effects of globalization. So diagnosing the problem is important, right? So the more we read, the more we understand about what is causing this rise in white nationalism, the better prepared we will be to think strategically about how to counter these actions. But I also think it's important to call out the complicity of the business community, right? The business community is willing to accept the changes in the nature of the Republican Party as long as they get what they want, right? So sort of a stalking horse for tax cuts and deregulation. And if the business community was not so complicit, the Republican meltdown and the rise of sort of the Trump Republicans would not have been as successful and powerful, right? And I'd also say if the business community were more active in defending democracy, the power of the white supremacists would be severely weakened, right? So it's not, these are complicated interactions and we have to sort of understand the complications. Going a little bit further down that track of trying to understand the mindset behind the rising white nationalism, I want to borrow a little bit from Jonathan Haidt's book, The Righteous Mind, right? And his claim is that if you think about sort of conservative mind and the liberal mind, they respond to different moral concerns in different ways, right? And again, I put this as a hypothesis. These are things that you need to interrogate yourself, think about whether or not you find them persuasive. But in the liberal mindset, it is really concerns about care and harm and fairness that motivate most of the morality, right? People are making arguments about equality, arguments about reducing harm, arguments about taking care of each other as being the top sets of moral concerns for the liberal side. On the conservative side, in addition to harm and fairness, very strong concerns about loyalty, right? And this is where the patriotism comes from, the concern about the flag as an image, the upset about Colin Kaepernick of kneeling down, right? In protest, legitimate protest against police brutality, but being viewed as disloyal, right, or betrayal. This indulgence in greater senses of authority, right, and the importance of authority, respect for authority, the sort of role of sanctity, right, the role of religion, the celebration of liberty and liberty of a particular form of being free from government, right? And this is just an invitation to start thinking about, can we understand what is motivating some of the conservative mindsets? Can we think about messaging in favor of democracy and voting in ways that might appeal more to a broader foundation, right, in terms of moral concerns, right? So again, I always tell my students that we want knowledge to enable strategic action, right? And I think there are better ways we can be understanding why conservatives are doing what they're doing, and we can be more strategic in our own advocacy and messaging around that. All right, so that's sort of the pivot now, to be thinking about how communities can respond better. Right? And we already know of how to respond to cheating of the rules and voter suppression. Right? That's what we did in the first civil rights movement. Right? That's what we've done almost every election since. Right? And one response is to organize. Right? And I love the introductory comments that say that voting has to be viewed as a collective act, right? Not just an individual act. And as you saw at the end of this list is we have to vote as a village, right? We have to view our responsibilities of voting as a village, right? And there's a lot of tools out there already how to plan your vote, right? Plan your strategy now, plan early. How are you actually going to conduct yourselves on the day that you want to vote? How might you vote earlier, right? So what's your plan and operationalize that. Educate yourself, right? Know the rules, right? So if somebody's going to try to stop you by having a new rule, know that rule, know how to comply with it, know how to get around it, right? So be strategic by knowing the rules and then educate others, right? Again, that notion of collective action, planning together, voting together, supporting each other, educating each other, viewing this as a communal right, right? As the community really is under various forms of threat, right? And we've seen that before. So I'm just going to say, we know how to respond. We have to be prepared. We've got to do the same things that our fathers and grandfathers and great-grandfathers and grandmothers did, right, in order to get around all of the obstacles that were put in their place in efforts of voter suppression. Harder now, right? How to respond to these attacks on democracy writ large, right? And this is just intuitions. I don't have an answer to that question. I think we all have to be struggling with that question. But part of it is to know our history, right? And that's why I love the story of Frederick Douglass, right? And we have to tell our stories, right? And the stories of members here of the Healthy Black Elders are part of the solution, right? In order to defend democracy. But I was teaching this article in one of my classes this week from Cornel West, who talks about the role of law in progressive politics. Right? And Cornel West is going back to the importance of history, preserving the history, telling the stories about the struggle, and using the inspiration of the struggles of our ancestors to fuel our struggles today. So this is a quote from Cornel West. He said, in addition, those who challenge that power must emphasize the moral character of past and present leaders and followers who cared, sacrificed, risked their lives and reputations for the struggle of justice and freedom. Right? So knowing history, telling stories, keeping that motivation alive is part of a tactical effort in order to keep us empowered and strong as a community as we're facing new threats to our own democracy. And the same article continues, again from Cornel West. He said, to avoid illusions, one must sustain hope for social change by keeping alive the memory of past and present efforts and victories and remaining engaged in those efforts, right? He says, as Nietzsche noted, subversive memory and other regarding morality are the political weapons of the weak, right? And they're strong weapons, right? They've won battles before, but in some respects, we are going back to a moment that we didn't think we had to live through again. Right? We're going back and struggling fundamentally for the right to vote. We're going back and having to struggle fundamentally for the right to live in a respectful, healthy, multiracial democracy. Right? So how can communities respond? Right? And I really believe that history, that storytelling, that preserving family histories and individual stories are an important part of motivating our current struggle. Right? So there's a huge role for elders like the Healthy Black Elders as keepers of family and community histories, right? So if you haven't told your story, start telling your stories. Start telling your family stories, right? Inspire others, right? By the struggles that you and your family have lived through, right? Motivate people, motivate each other, and get them ready for the fight that we're going to have to fight now. That creates opportunities for intergenerational learning as well, right? One of Judge Keith's aphorisms, and he didn't invent it, but he loved to indulge it, was to learn to listen, right? And you listen to learn, right? Learn to listen to learn. And so I think the Black elders need to be listening to the stories of their children, right, and their grandchildren, right? There's tremendous energy out there for racial justice. We have the Black Lives Matter protests. You have all of the energy that was around the summer of 2020 in response to the murder of George Floyd, right? So we have opportunities to have intergenerational storytelling about the nature of the stories from the history and the nature of the stories of contemporary struggle, right? And as Cornell West is saying, that those memories, those motivations are what are going to carry us forward to the fight that we have to fight today. Right? And I promise some language from Judge Keith. Right? You're going to hear the echoes of Cornell West about respect for history, about honoring the struggle of the past, as Judge Keith was leveraging that in very powerful dissents that he was writing towards the end of his career in 2016. So this is coming from a case, Northwest Ohio Coalition for the Homeless, which is, again, one of those many efforts to try to use voter suppression targeted at communities such as homeless that don't have the records necessarily in order to satisfy very restrictive voter lessons. And as I told you before, nothing got the judge angrier than people who were trying to restrict the right to vote. Right? And he used to say very clearly, right? You want to know what a good voter reform is? It's a reform that makes voting easier. Right? If you want to know what a bad voter reform is, it's a reform that tries to make voting more difficult. Right? And he was always advocating for expanding the right, making it easier to vote, making it easier for people to participate in democracy. Right? And when he came against people who are going to be pushing against that, he fought back very forcefully. So this is one of the quotes, right? Leveraging another one of his famous sayings, that democracies die behind closed doors. He says, by denying the most vulnerable the right to vote, he's talking about the homeless in this situation, the majority shuts minorities out of our political process. Rather than honor the men and women whose murdered lives open the door of our democracy and secure our right to vote, the majority has abandoned this court's standard of review in order to conceal the votes of the most defenseless. It says, I am deeply saddened and distraught by the court's deliberate decision to reverse the progress of history. I dissent. Right? And going on later, the opinion, you have this language. He says the majority's actions must be viewed in full light of the historical context. Right? And I'm hearing Cornell West, right? I'm hearing Judge Keith doing what Dr. West was telling us to be doing. He says the murders of countless men and women who struggled for the right to vote and equal protection cannot be overlooked. The utter brutality of white supremacy in its efforts to disenfranchise persons of color is the foundation for the tragedy that is majority's effort to roll back the progress of history. It says, I will not forget. I cannot forget. Indeed, America cannot forget the pain, suffering, and sorrow of those who died for equal protection and the precious right to vote. Right? And if you're not motivated by this, I don't know what's going to motivate you. Right? The history here, the power here, the energy here, the wisdom here is the same well that we have to be drawing from today and drinking from today. Right? And in that opinion, the judge did something really quite unprecedented. He reproduced in the judicial opinion, the photograph and the biography of every civil rights worker who was murdered in the right for struggling for civil rights and the right to vote. Right? And he made sure that the majority had to look at those pictures, right? Had to read those biographies, had to know that history as they were trying to roll history back and make it more difficult for people to vote. Right? In the back of my mind, as I've been kind of thinking about today, there's other echoes, right? What happens when democracy is at stake, right? Not only are they trying to cheat on the rules of the game, they're willing to burn the entire house down if they can't get what they want, right? And knowing what historical moment we are in is critically important. If we don't understand the threat, we can't respond to the threat, right? And this voice kept coming back, right? This language kept coming back. And I'm going to suggest to you, when I read it, it's going to sound familiar. And I'm going to suggest that we have to situate ourselves within that historical framework to know what the stakes really are, right? So 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, right? Conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we're engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived right? For a multiracial democracy, and so dedicated can long endure. So it is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they fought for here and have thus so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that this nation under God shall receive a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. Right? As I'm sure you all know, Abraham Lincoln and the Gettysburg Address of 1863. Right? Our nation is under attack again in terms of the foundation of democracy. And we have to be thinking seriously about how we can, as a community, right, honoring the values of our past and our history and our elders and the amazing tradition, particularly that the African-American elders can draw upon, can be the defenders of democracy today. Right? And if we're going to be fighting, we got to know what we're fighting for. Right? We're fighting for a healthy, pluralistic, multiracial democracy. Right? And in very similar language, I would also say we're fighting to build Dr. King's beloved community. And that work remains undone. And I think we're all being called into service in ways that we never expected would happen in our lifetime. But if we look to our past, I think we're going to find the tools, the energy, the strength, and the inspiration to be looking towards our future. Right? So I'm going to stop, right? I'm going to hand it off to Heather, and she can pick up on themes of the importance of community in these efforts.
Thanks, Peter. And so I will start by saying it's tough to follow that. While Professor Hammer really concentrates on government and democracy, my area really is health, and how health and other social determinants of health can be impacted by participation in, and importantly, lack of participation in our country's governance. And so I want to start by saying that it's really important to consider the health of communities. And I define that extremely broadly when we're talking about voting and voting rights, and the importance that having access to the levers of power in this country can have for communities, particularly communities who need to have government investing in the health and the social issues like access to housing, access to food, things that individuals themselves cannot do. Things like ensuring there aren't food deserts and people are able to access what they need. And we know that folks who experience health issues, and another thing that I define broadly, talking about both physical and mental health, and including, importantly, those who experience disabilities, have more access or issues when it comes to voting. It can have consequences in terms of election outcome, meaning that we have folks from these groups that are not able to get to the polls and place their vote. And so the folks that they may need or want in power don't get there. But it also speaks to having a lack of voice in the way that candidates create their platforms, what issues they are bringing to the table, what policies they're putting forth, as they consider what policies they need in relation to getting reelected. If they have written off groups of folks who they perceive as not voters, it can impact how they move forward with their election platform and can leave out issues which are critical in terms of health. It's important that we ensure things such as transportation, which we know can be problematic in terms of getting access to healthcare, but it can be an issue in terms of access to vote, particularly where the laws are what they are in terms of absentee voting and some of the changes we're seeing in terms of documentation. And as we're seeing these issues, it's going to be important to think about how we can come alongside communities to help them ensure that people within their communities are able to get access to the documents they need in order to vote, while we work to get the laws changed in ways that Peter was discussing. Social determinants of health or issues that create difficulties in achieving and maintaining health are really important, not only to people who already are dealing with physical or mental health issues, but they are really important in terms of our prevention efforts. And we know that, that if we can prevent these issues in the first place, they're far less costly, both from an economic perspective and from a social perspective. There's a body of literature that's really looking at how healthcare and mental health care providers can work to increase access to voting and work directly with their patients to ensure that they can participate when that's what the patient desires. And one of the things that we can consider from a healthcare perspective is how are we providing education to health and mental health providers on ways to support their patients in the communities within which they work in this important area. It's also really important that and this follows very nicely on what Professor Hammer discussed, that we're looking at communities to have the voice. Describing the importance of voting for each community may look different. And it's often best discussed between members of the community rather than exclusively by those who may be considered outsiders to the community. And I think that as Professor Hammer was describing the storytelling and the history, those pieces fit really well with this idea that so often we find folks coming in to do for communities rather than to come alongside and support the communities and what they want and what they're doing. And it's something that we need to continue to work on, that that efforts be community led. And it's one of the things that I get excited in seeing the community advisory board and the real work of the community themselves in the work that's happening in the group here, because it matters. I also don't think that the idea that this needs to come from communities in an effective way, because that's where the stories are, that's where the history lies, absolves anyone of being a person who needs to work for these reforms. Being community-led doesn't mean that others don't need to support the work that's being done there. And so again, I think that my area of interest and expertise lies really in how the policies and how governance can impact health. Certainly the concerns we're seeing around this discourse that is so divided. Exciting to see Professor Hammer talking about the hate book that really looks at some of the divides and some of the ways of thinking that are very different that we're seeing today. I think that it's important for us to understand that those things can have an impact on the health of our communities, both through, again, the health itself, creating barriers to voting, but also to the importance of policies which impact health, particularly those social determinants of health, being on the ballot and being things that are required of our elected officials. And so I'm going to stop, because one of the things Professor Hammer and I discussed was really wanting to hear from you and the questions that you have and being able to talk about those with you. And I think that with Professor Hammer's permission and Professor Dr. Perry's permission, if we can shift to that, I'd love to have some of those discussions with you for the rest of our time.
Thank you so much, Heather. amazing helping us connect to health. I would also say your talk also made me think of this idea of reframing aging that is very big in societies looking at funders and groups looking at how do we make communities for all ages. So there's a whole reframing aging initiative that also talks about let's not do us versus them. Let's talk about how we're all in it for an aging inclusive society. So of course, like health for all, policies for all, to build these communities for all. I'm going to turn it over to our last speaker before we have our Q&A, named Jim Bridgeforth. I wanted Jim to tell us again how long you've been a community advisory board member and why you participate. And then I know you have some things to share.
I've been on the advisory board about 20 years. And I got involved because of my involvement at work at the time, promoting the interest of minorities and seeing the disparities that the community was suffering as a result of prejudice, bias, et cetera, and in every area of life, health, wealth, you name it. And also based on my experience as a Southerner and being raised in the South and seeing my folks being subject to all of the kind of indignities associated with being a person of color, namely the poll taxes, the voting questions, the math test at the poll, et cetera, et cetera. So I was determined to do what I could to try to promote the interest of minority people, and particularly elders. So that's one of the reasons why I got involved in the Healthier Black Elders and also in the community. Because I think that being proactive is better than sitting on the sideline talking. So that was my interest. And I want to talk about something today before we get into the slides, because I'm listening to all of the conversations here. And I think that there's something we need to back up a little bit and realize when we talk to minority populations and communities, we have to talk about the process of preparation. And when you talk about voting, we have to be aware of the whole scenario related to number one, is that when you are voting, there's the primary, there's the midterm, there's the general election. So you have to be prepared to address and participate in all of those areas, because if you don't participate in the primaries, you're voting for candidates that other people put up. So your voice is almost hindered then, because your candidates potentially do not get involved in the final voting. The other thing I like to also see emphasized is that minority communities need to be educated on the importance of census. Because from the census, this is where your election and representation comes from. Because if you're not represented in the census, like for instance, Michigan is going to lose a seat in the House of Representatives. And so if you're underrepresented there, by the time you get to the great dance, you're already off the floor. You're not dancing. So I would like to see us talk about the whole process of getting prepared to vote. Number one, when the census come in, you participate, because why? Because that's where you're going to get a lot of the benefits that you're going to be trying to get through the election process. You vote and participate in the primaries, because that's where your candidates are going to get on the ballot. So I'm saying there's a whole educational process that we need to talk about in terms of minorities and other people getting prepared to vote. So I just wanted to bring that up. I will echo here what was said. Where's Sarah? Where's the slides? Sarah?
The slides are up, Jim.
Okay. Okay, I'm just gonna talk and you can just view the slides, because I know we're running out of time. And I will echo everything that's said here today, that it's very critical that everyone participate in the democracy in order for us to have democracy. I think that we are encouraging you who are listening and to get your friends out to vote. Make sure that number one, that they're educated on the requirements to vote. Number two is that they understand the issues that they're voting on. Number three, that they understand who they are voting for. And make no bones about it, is that this midterm election is very important because we got into this process, this problem, because people stayed home after President Obama got elected and didn't vote in the 2010 midterm. And so consequently, the foes of democracy, I'll just use a generic term here, took over all of these state houses and governorships. And then they began to enact these laws that would enable them to stay in power. So we have to make sure that we are prepared to understand the issues, know what we're voting on, and make sure we have the candidates, vote for the candidates who are consistent with our desires and needs. So you want to make sure that in terms of, if you want to vote, know if you're going to vote absentee ballot, know what is required, know when you need to request that ballot, know how much time it is to get the ballot, know what steps to take to obtain the ballot, and make sure you educated yourself on the issues and the candidates. Example of it is what's going on in Texas. They have this new absentee ballot thing going on there, but they have a process that says that if the ballot is denied, the people have so much time to correct whatever it is according to the new laws and to resubmit the ballot. But if you don't understand that, then your ballot is going to be spoiled because you're not going to be able to vote. The other thing I want to stress here is that we want to make sure that somebody mentioned it early, that we have a national network, that when we talk to our friends throughout the states, around the country here, that we want to make sure that they get out and vote. We want to have a dialogue, and that dialogue support the whole idea of voting. We want to make sure also that our children and everyone in our house votes, because that is important. I think too many times, and I'm maybe preaching a little bit here, that we start chasing the cart after it's gone. It's too late to start protesting after the voting is over. It's too late to start protesting after you missed the census. It's too late to start protesting if you didn't vote in the primary. And so we know what's going on. We know that they're enemies of our purpose. So let's get educated and let's fight them on a proactive basis by understanding the rules that they have put out there. Right now, in the 2022 election, there are 435 House seats that are up for election. That's every House seat. There are 34 Senate seats, including Michigan. I think there's 21 Republican seats and 13 Democratic seats up in the Senate. There are 36 governorships, including Michigan, 27 Secretary of States, 30 Attorney Generals, and 6,000 legislative races. So we need to become proactive in a national way and a local and national way in understanding and getting our friends to vote. We need to use social media, any tool we have available to encourage people to vote and to become educated on the issues that are before them. The other thing I want to stress is that the outcome of these, as was said here, the outcome of these races has significant impacts on our health care, on our daily activities, and seniors. The other thing to keep in mind is that these state races are oftentimes more important than the national races, because this is where you live and everything you do in here is going to be governed by your state legislators and your governors. Also be in mind that the Michigan State Representative legislature, their interest is to bypass the governor. So anyway, they have all of these petitions going. So now another thing is be aware of what petitions, which petitions you are signing. because some of these said that they can limit the voting rights that you have by merely getting enough signatures on these petitions, bypassing the governor and going straight to the legislature, who can enact these things without your approval or approval of the voters at large. There are also petitions out here that's trying to deal with the fact to stop the legislators from having all of these underhanded ways of passing laws. So we just want to remind you that do not sign voter petitions without clearly understanding what impact they will have on voting rights. Secure My Vote petition seeks to reduce access to voting, while Promote a Vote seeks to expand the access to voting. So we just want to encourage you to keep on fighting and not give up the fight, because it may look like a dark day now, but our ancestors fought even in darker days. And surely we can girdle our loins and begin to fight back through legal channels and becoming knowledgeable and arm ourselves with the whole armor, as they say in the Bible. And knowledge is wisdom, wisdom is knowledge, and knowledge is power. So we are not powerless to do something. We just have to get up and do it and be informed as to how to do it. So I encourage you to be informed, to get informed, and to share that information around the community. So please, again, urge your friends to vote, contact everybody you know, and let them know how important and very important this 2022 election is. So that would be my comments for today. I thank you for listening, and I encourage you to pick up the fight and keep going. Let's not shrink. And words to the contrary, it is deeds, it's being proactive and getting out there and being determined not to be suppressed. That's going to get us through this process. Thank you.
Thank you. That was wonderful, Jim. Thank you very much for giving us concrete ways in Michigan to think about these issues. I want to thank all of our speakers for putting their thoughts together, and in a lot of ways, their thoughts really complement each other, and history and what you need on the ground and how it relates to health and what you can do to be prepared. So thank you so much. I am thinking we have until 12:30. So we have a few minutes for questions, comments. I see we have one hand raised. Okay. And I also have one question that's been submitted to me. I'm going to run the Q&A, so feel free to put your questions in the chat. And again, the other thing is, for whoever's going to watch this today or in the future, you know, we're going to have a recording of this video. You can contact Sarah or Sean to how to get the recording. It'll be available in a few days. Some of us can send this recording to people in our networks. I know students could watch it. I know people of all ages could watch it. And, you know, there's a way, church groups, small senior groups at church groups, etc. Like, there's a way that this program is so powerful today. So feel free to share the link or call us to figure out how to get it. Let me see who has raised their hand. And I guess maybe just, oh, Bishop, do you want to just share your question?
Okay, I got it. Good morning, good afternoon to everyone. My question was, and I did put it in the chat, but has any of the laws changed concerning our voting rights that we need to be concerned about to address, to make the people aware of? Because I try to keep up with the laws, but I was listening yesterday to the news and how they have changed in Florida. And the woman's, or Atlanta, I can't remember which one it was, and she has re-registered to vote 3 times just because the laws keep changing. She wanted to make sure, and we want to be informed to make the people aware.
Can I answer part of that, Tam?
Go ahead, Jim.
I think there are two aspects to the question. Number one is that there may not be significant changes coming up on the 2022 election, But these petitions that are being circulated now in the state of Michigan will definitely impact the voting rights in the 2024 election.
Okay,
So what you want to make sure of is that we talk to people in our election office, local election offices, and can begin to prepare the people in the community for any changes that we may have missed. So rather than going to changes right now, what I would encourage you to do is contact our local election offices and make sure we have a clear understanding of what it is that we need to do, particularly as it relates to absentee ballots. And in terms of how much time you need, lead time you may need to get absentee ballot, what happens if you spoil the ballot, and also what IDs you might need to get the ballot, as well as when you vote in person. So I would make sure that I have a clear understanding of that from the city of Detroit and the state if necessary, because these things are flexible and they all stay in a state of flux. So, oh, we got it right here. Can you see that?
So I think we need to read this. Jim, can you see it?
Yes, I have it.
Okay, why don't you read it out? Because we took the time to make a slide of acceptable forms of picture ID, but we know some people are on the telephone. So go ahead, Jim, and read out.
The first one is a valid Michigan driver's license. The second is a Michigan state issued ID card, which you can get from the state, I think by asking the Secretary of State to give you that. A driver's license, a personal identification card issued by another state, the federal or state government ID, a U.S. passport, military ID photo, student identification from a high school or college institution of higher learning, a tribal identification card with, I can't see the, can we roll the slide up a little bit?
With a photo. Yeah,
Yeah,
sorry.
with a photo. So these are the primary forms of ID that we want to make sure that the community is educated on in terms when they get ready to vote. Now, I take the position that
Hold
again,
on, Jim, hold on. We have a second slide that says, how could you
I'm
vote?
getting
Oh, go
ready to
ahead.
get.
Good, go ahead, you go
I
ahead.
can't see, and if you do not have an ID, a part of the slide is blocked out. I can't see it. Is there any way to
read it.
give me the whole slide?
It's fully shared. I'm not sure why it won't share the full screen, but I can read it. I can go ahead.
Can you read it? If you have it, would
yeah.
you read it, please?
So when you're voting without an ID, there is an affidavit option. So if you don't have a photo ID, you can still cast your ballot simply by signing an affidavit attesting that you are not in possession of your picture ID. And you have this option for two reasons. You'll be given this option. One, if you just don't own an acceptable photo ID. And then two, those that do have an acceptable photo ID, but just don't have it with them. And I wanted to also share, of course, an ID can be obtained at the Secretary of State for $10. But you may receive a free state ID if you are age 65 or older, if you are legally blind, if you are a veteran, if you experience homelessness, if you're adding or removing the organ donor registry heart sticker, you may receive a free ID. If you have had your driving privileges terminated due to a physical or mental disability, and if you're receiving state aid. So those are all reasons why you may receive a free state ID as well.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to keep that up for a minute, Sarah.
Oh,
So
no
we know
problem.
some of you are on the telephone. And so you're hearing these, but it was a lot of options and choices. You can call our office and we will talk to you more about the information we just shared about IDs. We can print out and mail you the list of acceptable form of IDs. That's very easy for us. So I guess what we want to convey from the Healthier Black Elders Center is we want to facilitate anything you need in order to vote. And so we want to do our part as an NIH funded center who knows the importance of voting for all communities but including our communities in both Flint and Detroit. So I'm going to read the phone number you can call us at: 313-664-2616, and we will go over this information, or just print it out and put it in the mail to you. So feel free to call us in the next few days or anytime. I'm going to open it up. Bishop, I hope that was helpful. And I guess before we move on, is there any other comments about Bishop's question from any of the other panelists?
Yeah, I would just add to the wonderful information that was provided, thinking about when you vote for the Secretary of State, you're actually voting for the person who will oversee elections, right? When you vote for the county clerk, you're voting for somebody who's overseeing the election. And candidates could have very radically different positions on what they think the proper approach is to enforcing voting rules, right? So I think a fair generalization to say that most Democratic candidates are in the line which Judge Keith was talking about, trying to make voting easier, trying to make voting more accessible, and that many of the Republican candidates for those positions are trying to make voting harder, right? Trying to have stricter rules. And so in addition to being very careful about the petitions you sign and what sort of laws you would vote for, also be intentional about knowing when you're electing Secretary of State or the city or county clerk, what their positions are in terms of how they will administer the voting system.
Correct.
Thank you. Okay, I see that we have a question from Cynthia Howell. I'm going to encourage Cynthia to talk and just ask her question. Cynthia, are you there?
You can unmute, Cynthia, so that we can hear your question, or you can type it into the chat if you don't want to unmute.
Okay. Well, I'll wait for Cynthia. Come on anytime. I have another question out there. We'll go back to Cynthia's. So we've had different speakers with different connections to the community for sure. We wanted to know if any of you on the panel had seen effective ways to engage people to vote. Politics are so hard to talk about. People get very partisan quickly. It's been a very hard time with the pandemic also, kind of as an overlay to all of it. Have you seen any strategy that has worked? So I'll just let anyone chime in.
I think education, when I talk to people, the thing that I'm talking about is self-interest. And that is voting the issues that really are important to you. The other thing of it is tuning out the noise. And that is the wedge issues. And I also take the position, tend to your own business. When you start getting out, trying to voting to deny other people their rights, I'm talking about women, for instance, to people, then I think you're going far afield of what, and not taking care of your own.
Hold on, Jim. Hold on.
I'm trying to come in. I can't. Oh.
Are you on 2 devices, Cynthia? You'll need to log off of one. Uh-oh.
Cynthia, let's see.
I think she logged off. It looked like she had 2 devices she was using, so she'll be back.
Okay,
I'm
we'll see. She might be back. Hi, Cynthia.
There you are.
You're here. Cynthia, feel free to ask your question, and we'll come back to Jim's statement too. I just want to. It's a day in a life on Zoom.
Yes.
Hi, Cynthia.
And you can just press unmute. Just click the microphone in the lower left side of your screen. There you go. We can hear you now.
Okay. I couldn't see that the whole seminar. I couldn't see me, and I couldn't unmute. But I'm trying to take me off the other chat. But anyway, what I wanted to say about spoiled ballots. Let me take you off of here.
Okay, I'm gonna ask you to unmute one more time, Cynthia. I muted you so we avoided the feedback.
Now,
Through it.
I'm just gonna move my phone away because I couldn't see me on the other to mute or unmute, but I just wanted to say about spoiled ballots. I have been an election inspector and a chairperson for many years. If you spoil a ballot, you have the opportunity to correct the ballot. If you don't understand, it should be someone at the precinct that can help you with that. Usually what they will do will have both parties come over and help you to understand what you're doing.
All right, I'm going to restate that, Cynthia. It's super important. So thank you. I'm glad we didn't give up. If you have spoiled ballots, people working at the precinct are supposed to help you solve this problem. That's what I take from your message, and that's very important. So this idea that, oh, it's impossible for you to vote should not be accepted. So I think that's also the message. I hope. Is that okay, Cynthia? Thanks. All right, super. I'm gonna go back to, I know I interrupted Jim and I'm so sorry. So bring us back to your strategies and I guess recap what you were saying about talking about self-interest, et cetera.
Well, I think the main thing that people need to understand about this climate we have is that we have people here that are pushing wedge issues. And the whole idea is to divide us. But the thing that we don't think about oftentimes, while I'm worried about Sarah and trying to keep her from having what rights she has, they have their hands in my pocket. And I think it was Lyndon Johnson that said that all you have to do to get white people to vote against their interest is to give them someone to hate. And while they're hating, you can put their hand in their pocket and steal everything they have. And I'm pretty sure that's not indigenous to white people. But anyway, what I'm saying is we need to educate people to stay away from wedge issues. And that is, vote the things that you need to do. An example, and I'm preaching a little bit, but speaking of what Heather was talking about, there was a bill up to reduce the price of insulin. And one of the Republican legislators said, well, if the insulin is too high, have people with diabetes lose weight. That was their solution. But what I'm saying is we get all these wedge issues in here, then we forget to vote about the pocketbook interest or the health interest that are germane to our needs. So that would be my issue, was to stay away from the wedge issues and vote primarily on the issues that mean something to you and your community. And stop trying to keep other people down because somebody told you that.
All right. Any other? Thank you, Jim. Any other comments from panelists? Strategies to get people excited about voting.
Yeah, I would echo what Jim started with, the talk to your friends. People are going to be most persuaded by people they know. So reach out to family and friends, your trusted sources, listen to other people is one, I think, very effective strategy. The other thing I would say is that back to that kind of notion of strategic messaging, and this is complementary to what Jim is saying about wedge issues, voting is patriotic. I mean, there are aspects of voting which really hits the whole range of the moral foundations that exist. And so don't be afraid to be talking about voting in very patriotic ways, which it should be viewed as. And there are ways in which kind of that type of framing is one that is broadly appealing, right? And avoids the wedge component, but rather is speaking to a common history, a common set of values that is a better way to try to be persuading and reaching people in the beginning.
Yes, I also was thinking about the patriotism part and this idea that wars have been fought, so we have these rights. And so, you know, it's something maybe we're taking for granted, but a lot of patriotism is honoring people who have sacrificed. And as someone who's a naturalized citizen, I take my right to vote very seriously because I didn't start my life in this country or sort of with the right to vote. I will open it up. I see that Roland Samaru, who is also on our community advisory board and really helped Henry with the crafting the part of Henry's speech about the linkages to health. Roland behind the scenes. We've been doing a lot behind the scenes, everyone. But Roland put in, you can look at other websites. You know, we're not the only place you can get information for sure. The League of Women Voters, Voters Not Politicians. You can talk to your city clerk. AARP has a lot of resources on voting also. Any other questions? Let me know. Or comments from the panelists. We have about 3 minutes left.
I would like to thank Peter and Heather for their input today. I think it was very, very helpful, very beneficial, and also Henry, and very knowledgeable. I think it was very, very, and going forward, we like to keep you guys around so that when we need some heavy hitters, we can call on you. But I really do appreciate the input that you had today, and I learned a lot from it. So thank you very much.
I was going to thank you, Jim, but I say that learning from you and Henry has been my treat today. So really appreciate the ability to sit and listen to other folks and to hear the good questions we're getting, and just acknowledge all the hard work that Tam's team and Sarah and everybody else have put into making this all happen. So my gratitude.
We got a good team.
Absolutely. No, it's fantastic. And I do want to thank you both. I would echo what Peter said about both of you and going along with the telling stories. I think one of the things that is we're talking about how to get people to vote and education is listening. And it was a delight to listen to both of you and learn from you. So thanks for your time today. Thanks for having us.
So I see that Roland also says, be part of the process. A lot of people do work on voting day as a way to contribute. And so, you know, you could get a position at a polling booth for a shift, etc. I also think it's worth mentioning that we purposely said we want to do this program in April. The community advisory board, our social determinants of health committee, critical crossroads, were really thinking about what we wanted to do. And we were getting worried about these petitions being circulated. And that's why I've put it in a couple times that, Sarah, can you also put in the chat at the end of this, that we have outlined like the different voter petitions and what they contain. But second of all, we have a few months till the midterms, right? So we decided we didn't want to go too long without really talking about this issue. But I guess I would ask anyone on the panel or in the audience, what can we do from now until November or August, even if there's a primary in August? You know,
You going to the car?
So anyway, how do we keep this momentum going, or any comments you have and thoughts? And that will probably be the end of our last question.
Well, what I'd like to see, and I was going to make this recommendation to you in the committee, I'd like to see us look at another targeted date somewhere down the road where we can do as we get closer to the midterm, that we can do a refresher, a reminder, or maybe a rebroadcast of what we've done here today. And I think that that's very critical because, you know, we try to set the framework. And as we get closer, we don't want people to forget, particularly getting out to vote, knowing why you're voting and knowing who you're voting for and those kinds of things. So I would recommend that we consider doing this maybe sometime, I don't know if the primary is in August, so we might want to do it somewhere in July or something like that. I think we look at those dates, but I would definitely recommend that we do a refresher as such before we get to the primaries and certainly the the 2022 vote.
We can absolutely look at that, Jim. And if we are able to do a July event, we will notify everyone by email. If you'd like to be part of that emailing list, you can give us a call at the center. Again, 313-664-2616.
Any last comments from our panelists today?
Yeah, I have one. This is Henry.
Yes.
Since the voting time is approaching, I get overtures from my representatives in my district. And I would say that was the opportunity really to bombard her. I forget, I can't even remember her name, but I certainly would find an opportunity to direct questions to your local district representatives, especially now that they're running. So don't be afraid to email or send letters or even call if you have very pivotal questions or questions that you're not certain of as how to proceed. So I strongly suggest that.
I agree, Henry.
Yes, I will say I see some last parting comments in the chat. Try to make sure that the information you're looking at is accurate. Look carefully at the information. Consider joining organizations that are getting involved to be a part of democracy. So I want to just thank everyone. I know Sarah has some parting words. Rebroadcasting this or asking us for the link so you can rebroadcast it, fantastic and easy. We will, in our printed messaging to all of our members, definitely highlight the dates of voting and the importance of voting, etc. Sarah, I'm going to turn it over to you, but I just want to wholeheartedly thank our panelists today too. Thanks for helping us put together. There was a lot of preparation for this event today, and so we thank you. Sarah, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Tam. And thank you to all of our panelists. This was an excellent, incredibly engaging, and really exciting presentation today. So thank you all. Before I move forward, I did see Bishop Bernadelle Jefferson had their hand raised again. Was there a final comment that you had? I don't want you to feel cut off.
I did, and a very concern of mine, because many of the churches are yet closed, and that was one way that many people were informed about the issues, especially the non-partisan issues that can be discussed over the pulpit and to help to inform. And so I don't know the way to inform the people now, and we need to concentrate on that, because that is a very important and a very big way to contact many people. So
Absolutely.
just a thought.
I agree, Bishop. It means that everyone on this call are part of lots of other networks. We know it. So start talking it up. If we can be a resource, share the video link, etc. Share the petition drive explanations too. Yes, all of our resources at the Michigan Center for Urban African American Research, we would love it if more use it and engage with it. All right, Sarah.
All right, I will go ahead and close us out then. I just want to thank everyone so much for all of the wonderful words that you shared today. Thank you to all of our guests at today's event. And I want to extend a special thank you to the Resource Centers for Minority Aging Research, the Wayne State University School of Social Work, and the Damon J. Keith Center for Civil Rights. I want to extend a very special thank you as well to our Critical Crossroads Committee members for all of their hard work and their attention to the social issues that we're facing today. And finally, I want to thank all of you, all of our attendees, for joining us today. Again, today's presentation has been recorded. I think we may be missing a short moment in there where the button got bumped. So we may be missing maybe 4 seconds of the presentation, but everything else has been recorded and will be available on our website. If there's anyone here that is not yet a member of the Healthier Black Elders Center and would like more information about it or would like to join, we can sign you up over the telephone and you can give us a call. Again, our number is 313-664-2616. And when you become an HPEC member, you do receive our biannual newsletter you learn about research studies, and you learn about future programming like this one. Thank you again, everybody. Stay safe, and we hope you will join us next month for a presentation from Emily Bodie, a physical therapist from the Recovery Project, and she will be talking about oncology, rehabilitation, and prehab. And that will be on Tuesday, May 17th from 11 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. using all the same information that you used today. So the same Zoom link, as well as the same phone number and password. And we hope that you'll join us then.
Sarah,
care, everyone.
Sarah, we just want to thank you and your team for the great support that you provide to us as CAB members, and encourage you to keep up the good work and help us to stay looking good. Thank you very much for all your work. And I know I certainly personally appreciate our interaction. So thank you again.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Jim and Henry, of course, for all of your help and all that you do. Okay, everyone, take care. Have a good afternoon. And thank you again for joining us today.
Okay, be safe.
Okay, take care.